Hey guys, I wanted to go over our poem from last week, Poppy's Jalopy, and give you some tips about why the answers that are right and why the answers that are wrong are probably not as strong an answer as the ones that are incorrect. Um, Now, this assignment in particular is super hard because you only have 4 questions. So automatically, if you miss one, then you're already down to a 75. So try to look at it as like 4 points instead of out of 100, like you're trying to figure out your grade. If you get 2 right and 2 wrong, you're about halfway there. If you get 75% right, then you did a good job. Um, but if you got all 4 wrong, um, then that's where you um, really need to spend some time reading those answer choices very carefully. All right, so let's get started. Question 1 was which statement best expresses the theme? And so if you look at our graph down here, um, obviously most people said the theme was B. With a strong imagination, you can go anywhere. But we have almost an equal number of people that picked A, spending time with family can be an adventure. So there's one reason why I think that one might not be as strong as the one about the imagination. So remember, theme needs to be super universal. And so even though this is a poem about um, 2 people that we assume this is like a grandfather and a grandchild, it could be that Poppy is just the name of the person. It could be a neighbor. And so, since it doesn't specifically talk about a family relationship between Poppy and the speaker, then I think that's why I would not lean toward A as an answer rather than B, because B seems a little bit more universal. And the main idea of the poem is that even though um, these 2 people want to go to all these places, for some reason they can't. They're stuck at their house, they're stuck in their yard, kind of thinking about the places that they want to go and using their imagination. I think there's a lot more evidence of all the of the speaker talking about the places they'll go. You've got this reference to the wide highway. You've got all of this whole stanzas about the places they would go. And then, so that I would say that, you know, that's the main, there's more evidence that it's about imagination versus family. And then a lot of people pick C. Some objects are more valuable than they appear. So again, that's universal, and I can see where that could apply. The jalopy is way more valuable to the speaker and Poppy than it might be to somebody else who comes along and needs a car that runs. So I can see where that answer could have been true also, but um, I think that we only have that in the first stanza and the fourth stanza and then but that I, we keep coming back to that imaginary trip. That last line is the imaginary trip, and we've got all these places, all these references to the trips that they're going to go on. So I think A and C were close, but B was just a little bit stronger. And we've talked about that in class about when you have 2 answers that are right, one of them's going to be just a little bit more right than the other. So that was a hard question to me. All right, so number 2, which detail best supports that? So one thing they do on this is if you get number 1 wrong, then I don't think they count off for number 2, because they're assuming that you got number 2. If you get number 2 wrong and get number 1 wrong, they're assuming it's because you didn't know what number 1 was. And so, so I think that is a little bit quirky with their grading. So it may not be a straight 175, 50, 25. So I think they give you a little partial credit if you get number 2 wrong. Because I would definitely say that answer A would go with would have gone with A. So if you had picked A, those two would have at least matched. But since we decided that the correct answer was B, a strong imagination, you can go anywhere, then we need to pick the one that's about going somewhere, which would leave us with B or C. D would go with answer choice C, but since that wasn't the right answer, so I guess if you had picked C on this question and then picked D on this question, they would have given you a little credit for being able to match up a detail that goes with an answer. All right, but since we know it was imaginary trips, we would want to pick the one that's an imaginary trip, which would be C is more imaginary than a wide highway. I think that one, that could be realistic if the jalopy was working. So for this one, C is the right answer. And it doesn't look like nobody picked D on that one. So, which makes sense because nobody picked that on the other one. All right, so question 3, stanza 4. So I have to count my stanzas. Here's a stanza, that's 1. You look for the places where they're big spaces. So here is stanza 2, it's a little bit shorter. Here is stanza 3, it's a little bit longer. And here is stanza 4. So it says, Poppy's jalopy is battered and worn. The rusty paint's chipped, the leather is torn. For years it's been sitting behind the wood shed. The tires are flat, the motor is dead. It's rusty, it's dusty, our trusty jalopy, just right for those trips made by me and my Poppy. All right, so first part of this question is you got to know where stanza 4 is, otherwise you're reading the wrong section. So I'm kind of wondering if that's why these answers may have been all over the place. The first time I tried to do this video, I was saying this is stanza 1, this is stanza 2, this is stanza 3, this is stanza 4. So I was counting that incorrectly. We have to look for that bigger space. Okay. All right, so stanza 4, if we read about all the things wrong with the jalopy, about how worn and battered it is, that would help us get to answer A. Poppy's jalopy doesn't run. Okay, if the motor's dead, the tires are flat, we're not going anywhere in that car. Whereas if we answer choice B, looks like just a few of you picked that one right there. So if Poppy's jalopy, let's see. I guess it talks up here about how, I don't know, it doesn't really talk about how it's dirty. It just talks about how things are broken and how they don't work. Like, I'm not really seeing anything about being dirty. Dusty and rusty. I guess dusty right there, but that's really the only reference to being to dirt. And so everything else is just like kind of saying that it's broken. Okay. So I wouldn't have, so that's why I would say that B is wrong. Does that stand to tell us why the speaker loves the jalopy? Nope, I think we definitely get that one here, which would be stanza 5, which is just two lines long. So we wouldn't count that in stanza 4. And then D says it reveals that Poppy's jalopy is out of gas from their trip. Well, that's just untrue altogether. And so that's not why it's not running. So that would be the least right answer. Okay. All right. So then question 4, this was our short answer. So they always give me an example to kind of look at. All right. So if we look at this, obviously our answers are going to vary, and your answer does not have to be this long. They give me a super long answer to try to include all of the different possibilities. When you are writing a written response, I am looking for, number 1, did you address the question? Because sometimes y'all miss the whole point of the question. So read those questions carefully. In this one, we want to know what is the speaker's point of view, okay? And then, so that's kind of like, how does the speaker feel about Poppy's jalopy? And then the second part is, you got to cite some evidence. You got to tell me what line it came from, or, quote that line in your answer. You got to use some words from the poem. Otherwise, I'm going to, you're not going to get that level 4 answer. All right, so we want to talk about how the speaker appreciates Poppy's jalopy for taking them on adventures. So you can write that different ways. I accepted answers where if you just said that she likes Poppy's jalopy for taking them on adventures, that was fine. You don't have to use a big word like appreciation. But I do like it when you use vocabulary like that. That's how I score some of those on a level 4. Okay, so then she gets into the evidence. She says, for example, after going into detail about how broken down the car is, the speaker describes the car as our trusty jalopy. So anybody who used the phrase trusty jalopy got extra points for that, because that is how we know that this broken down junky car is something of value. All right. The speaker discusses their adventures in the jalopy in great detail in lines 11 through 29. So that's right here, all the way down. So both of those passages are about going on adventures in the jalopy. Okay, they go everywhere from just down the highway to Niagara Falls to the moon. Okay, now are they really going those places? No, because stanza 4 tells us that the jalopy's broken down and that they're only going in their imagination. Okay, so finally the students can talk about how the car is broken down in stanza 4, but they also reaffirm, the speaker tells you, oh, even though this car is broken down, it is just right for trips made by me and my Poppy. Okay, so without seeing people's names, you can see that the shorter answers are definitely ones that get lower scores. If you got 0 points, it's really because you did not address that prompt. Okay, and usually in the comments, I'll tell you personally why I gave you the score you did, but you want to make sure that you're really thinking about what the question is asking you, and then giving those poetry details or those details from the poem to help explain your answer and why you think the way you do. And you've been doing that for a long time, so really be careful. Make sure you're using words from the text, making sure that you are thinking about what your answer is supposed to be. Okay, some of them are a little shorter, but they used some details. That probably should have been a level 2. Sometimes I start grading easy and then I get harder, or sometimes I grade hard and then I get easier the more I have to do. Kind of depends on how tired I am, how distracted I get. But anyway, try to do that this week with your new poem, The Mysterious Egg. Be careful readers, thinking about looking for that text evidence and thinking about choosing the best answer out of the choices given.